What's up? What's up? It's off season and now the real work begins for the coaches. And y'all have been asking me for a recruiting update, so here you go. Friend of the show, Justin Wells of Inside Texas, is here to bring us up to speed during a wild cycle. Subscribe to Inside Texas to stay up to date on recruiting and the program at large. Visit InsideTexas.com and check it out and subscribe today. Also, don't forget to pick up your new hat from Last Stand Hats. Use promo code TexasHomer, all caps, for 10% off your purchase at LastStandHats.com. All right, Justin, the viewers know you, so let's get right into it. First things first, quarterbacks. And I wanted to check in on Malik Murphy. Their team was struggling early in the season, but it appears like they're rolling now. So what's the update on Malik?
He is playing really well. That's one of the bright spots for Texas fans is Malik Murphy. One of the holdups for him was his lack of experience. Well, he's getting that now. He came back from an early season injury. He broke a collarbone. He missed a few games, but came back and they won their sectional title last week. They're moving on to the next round. He's happy. He's a happy kid because I got to catch up with him on Sunday. He's excited because he's playing. He's still playing. He's playing for something that's bigger than him. This is a kid that could have moved to a bigger school. There were chances that he could transfer to a modern day type place to get more exposure, to have more eyes on him. But he stayed at home. He stayed where he wanted to. And I give him credit for that. I think he's going to be a locker room guy. I really do. I think he's a project in what he needs to become more of before he can contribute at the collegiate level. But from a personality standpoint, I think that guy's going to come in. He knows Sark's bringing in another quarterback in this class, potentially another quarterback in this portal. He understands that. It's part of the competition. He's a guy he's a good kid with a good level head. And I think that him having success playing games, not in the 7-on-7 setting, but in the actual games and doing well, give that kid a ton of credit. I think he's doing really well.
I'm excited to hear that. And I like Malik's personality, and I'm ready to see him get developed in the college game. And are there any transfer portal quarterbacks out there floating around?
That's one of those things where there's probably a handful that could be that we could name, but it's all speculation. Like I mentioned earlier, Jack Miller, with the Devon Brown situation, he's leaving Ohio State. I don't feel like that's something Texas would look at, but I think you'll see more movement with quarterbacks maybe another couple of weeks after the signing day, so they can kind of see which quarterbacks from 2022 are headed and what their competition may be, and even more so early January. And then I think you're going to see another exodus of guys at the end of spring. Like for example, South Lake Carroll's Quinn Ewers up at Ohio State. I believe he's going to go through the spring to see if he can win that job in front of Stroud or McCord. And if he doesn't, I think that's a guy that could also, wind up in the portal at the end of the season. And so there's just a lot of names to speculate on right now, but I guarantee you Steve Sarkisian is looking at every kid he possibly can because he wants more arms in that quarterback room.
100%. Thanks for mentioning Quinn because I would have had to ask about him next. So let's move to wide receiver. What's the deal on the Stewart commit to A&M? It's not an ideal system fit. So, what's the reasoning there?
It's one of those things where it came down to Texas and Texas A&M simply because I do think he wanted to stay close. I think Alabama was absolutely a place he could see himself playing. I think Florida is a place that he could see himself playing. But down deep, I think he wanted to stay close to home. He was once committed to Texas. He saw the vision. He's a big fan of Coach Sark and Coach Banks. I think those are guys he really liked. And I think that's why Texas was in it until the end. And, that commitment kind of came out of nowhere. And that's exactly how Evan Stewart rolls. He does not want you to know what he's doing. He wants you to keep you on your heels. He's got over 1 million social media followers, across different platforms of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. There's probably some other stuff I've never even heard of that he's doing. And so, Evan doesn't really fit Texas A&M. He doesn't really fit College Station. But you know what? This is his call. That's his decision. He has to figure that out. Maybe he comes to A&M and becomes the first big-time receiver the school ever produces. That's a possibility. They've got some good quarterbacks coming in there as well. But he also has to understand the system isn't set for speed wide receivers. It's a ball control, run the ball, throw the tight end, have a play action game. And so Evan Stewart went Evan Stewart. We knew it was going to be A&M or Texas. He decided to make it A&M a couple weeks before signing day, and I'm pretty sure that it's done. But it's Evan Stewart, so you never know.
Jordan Hudson is also a big name out of Texas, and he committed to SMU with Samples. Dykes leaves SMU to TCU. Samples follows, and now Hudson is committed to TCU. Are we just wasting our breath wondering if Hudson is even still a possibility?
Absolutely. He was going to follow Samples from the start. The only shot I think Texas really had was back in October. They were going to potentially get him in on an official visit. They were going to get him in to try to do whatever they could to shake him loose and see if it could get him to the good guys, like you said. But Jordan was going to follow Coach Samples. A couple weeks ago, I caught up with Coach Samples, who was getting courted by a lot of schools. There were some SEC schools, some Big 12 schools. They were looking for him because they know he can bring DFW kids, and that's why he's going to TCU. He's going just down the street, and so now Jordan Hudson doesn't have to really move that much further, and I don't expect him to be in any Texas plans. He was following Coach Samples, and that's exactly what he's going to do.
And now the group all the Texas fans are most curious about. Offensive line is a major priority for this class, and I'm going to ask about all the guys. But first, let's talk about Devon Campbell. Any shakeup with the Riley to USC move? I know he visited SC in the past.
Devon was very fond of USC for a stretch, probably towards the end of the summer and a little bit earlier in this season. But that was also with the previous staff. Now, he did have a relationship with Lincoln Riley and Bill Beatonball and those guys at OU as well. OU is probably Texas' top competition going down the stretch. I don't think he's going to look at USC again. He may take another visit. He may take an in-home visit. He may do something like that. But I think there's a sense of distrust in that recruitment, particularly because, these guys were telling him a week ago that you could come to the Mecca that they called Norman, Oklahoma, and now they're calling it Los Angeles, California. And for a young recruit like that, a young kid that's trying to figure out his way and build the best relationships, that's not the best pattern to do that. Texas is squarely in this. I actually think Texas is the quiet leader. I think they've held a good advantage for a good portion of his recruitment. They've recruited him the longest. He's visited Austin more than any other school. But I am curious how this USC move is gonna happen. It's gonna affect him. How OU, when they bring in their new coach, how that's gonna affect him. I'm actually going to see him play basketball tonight in Arlington, and I hope to have more. And we should have an update at InsideTexas.com tonight.
And continuing with the usual suspects, what's the word on Oregon commit Kelvin Banks? Seems clear Texas isn't giving up its pursuit.
Kelvin is 100% committed to Oregon. He wants us all to know that. He's told me that. He's told many others that. But he's still talking to these other schools. And I think there's a sense with Kelvin, more so than some of these other recruits, staying closer to home means more to Kelvin. And I'm not saying he's not going to Oregon. I'm just saying this is a kid that from the start we felt would probably pick a school closer to his house. He's very close to his mother and father. His mother had been ill over the last few months. And so I think that's an important thing, is staying close to your family. And Kelvin has always been that way. Now, I think in his mind, he's decided I could do it in Oregon. But I also think his other side of his mind is saying, I could also do it down the road. He's looking at Texas. He visited a couple weeks ago. He's looking at Texas A&M. I believe he was there last weekend. And so or 2 weeks ago. And so there's, Texas and A&M, to me, feel like they're still in it. They're still going to push for him. I actually think that Texas probably has a little bit of an advantage over A&M with Banks. But at the end of the day, he reminds us he's 100% Oregon. So Texas is not stopping. They're going to come see him today. They're going to go see him again whenever they can. And Kelvin Banks is still listening. And to every fan, that's the key. He is still letting guys in his house.
And then we have Cam Dewberry, and he's been on the edges all year, it seems like, out in the mist. But is Texas actually, making any real progress there?
I think it's another Texas A&M battle. Whereas at the beginning of his recruitment, he was pretty much hell-bent on leaving the state. He was talking to Ohio State. He was talking to LSU. He had a little bit of Bama coming at him. He was talking to OU a lot. He's still doing that. But I think the more that his recruitment was collected, the more it felt like, he could do just what he needs to, closer to home. The SEC, I think, was a big selling point too, which you give A&M the advantage there. With Texas joining the conference at some point, I think that kind of leveled that out a little bit. OU was looking really good over the last few months. And this move with Lincoln Riley and Beatonball, it's going to affect how, some of these kids view the Sooners. You've seen it, and we've seen it over the last 48 hours. Almost a third of their class has seemed to decommit. Whereas with Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, we haven't seen any decommitments with Notre Dame. So I think this is going to hurt OU, especially with some of these kids down the stretch with your Devon Campbells, your Cam Dewberrys, guys like that. I think this is another Texas A&M battle. I kind of feel like A&M has a slight edge there. But I do think Texas is going to go see him this week. I do feel like Texas is going to put the effort. This is a guy that he wants early playing time. And when he saw Texas play, he saw an opportunity for early playing time. And for a guy like Dewberry, that's a big selling point. And Texas is going to continue to hammer that home down the stretch.
And how about old Malik Agbo out of Washington?
I think Malik Agbo goes to Texas. It's going to be Texas or Auburn, in my opinion. Miami's in it. OU was in it up until Sunday. Again, they're out of it. And so he really liked Texas after his official, I believe it was in October. They checked all the boxes. He had a great time. He got to bond with a lot of the other recruits and players with Cole, Connor Robertson, Cole Hudson, those guys. And so Malik Agbo is a kid. He's a really good kid. He's a fun guy to talk to. He's from Washington State. He's up there from Federal Way, Washington. And so he's going across the country, and he has no problem doing that. And so at the end of the day, his decision is going to come on December 15th, first day of early signing period. And I think Texas is in a great spot for him right now. It's going to come down to UT or Auburn. And if I had to make a choice, I think Agbo is going to be in this Texas class.
Awesome, man. And are there any other key offensive linemen I'm neglecting to mention?
I would mention NATO, yep. Umazulu from Allen, only because Texas is still pushing there. They want this kid. They really want him. He knows that too. He's looking at Texas hard. He likes Coach Flood. He likes Coach Sark. He's looking at OU. He's looking at Alabama. He's looking at Auburn. He's looking at a handful of other schools. I think Alabama might be the school that he picked, that wants to pick, but I'm not sure if there's going to be enough spots for him to pick at this point because he's kind of waited so long. Alabama doesn't usually wait too long when it comes to targets. And so NATO's a guy we need to mention just because Texas is squarely in that one. And at the end of the day, I think you could probably close the book on Cam Williams at Duncanville. I do think he's going to wind up either sticking with Oregon or potentially flip into TCU. There's a chance he could follow Samples there as well. But Texas really likes Cam. This is a guy that they're recruiting, they say, until he signs on signing day. But I'm pretty sure with all the movement that's happened over the last few weeks, I think he's probably settled in at Oregon. So for offensive linemen, that's probably the wrap.
Great info as always, man. Now let's jump over to the defensive side and key into some names there. First, how's the recruitment of cornerback Denver Harris going?
Denver Harris, he is supposed to see a handful of Texas coaches are supposed to see him this week. I don't believe it's going to be Sark. I think Sark's going to save that in-home till the very end so he can get that last impression. That's a big deal. But I think there's three schools. I think it's Texas, I think it's Alabama, and I think it's LSU. He loves Corey Raymond and what they're doing at LSU. So I think they're always going to be a factor. How much remains to be seen. Now that they bring in Brian Kelly, we'll kind of see what direction that goes. But if he's retaining Raymond, which I believe he is, that's going to be ginormous. With Alabama, that to me I feel like that's where Denver's going to pick. I think he's kind of always liked Alabama because he sees just the litany of corners that come and DBs that come out of that program that go to the NFL. Nick Saban is a former defensive back coach. That's kind of his specialty. So I've always kind of thought Denver was going to go to Alabama. But for whatever reason, Texas has stayed around this. Like they've hung around the rim from the start. And there's something, I feel like Texas has got a really good shot because he hasn't committed to Alabama yet. If he was so sold on Bama, I think it would be over. But Texas is giving him something to think about. He also sees the early opportunity for playing time. He also likes the idea that his family loves the idea they can travel to Austin and make it back in one day and not be on the road the entire time. Whereas Tuscaloosa is probably an 8-9 hour drive. And so I know that for the family, that's an appealing part as well. And so, for the longest, I kind of thought Alabama was going to snake him, and I kind of still think they might. But if he was Alabama, I feel like he would have already committed. And I feel like Texas has hung around the rim just enough. If they can get that rebound and they can get Sark in on that one of those last in-home visits, they got a shot.
And the, brilliant message board detectives are saying Denver to A&M could be in the cards. And he slighted them a bit earlier on Twitter in the season, but is there any smoke to A&M being back in the pack?
I think so. You know, A&M is they're still recruiting him. A&M loves Denver. I just get the sense that he likes the other schools more. You know, is there a chance A&M could swoop in at the very end? Possibly. But I do think that Alabama and Texas are a few notches ahead of A&M. They've been in it. You know, if you're a South Houston kid that's really talented, A&M is going to be in it. But I just don't get the sense that Denver's a big College Station guy.
Yeah, but we didn't think Stewart was either. But Jimbo seems to become, quite convincing this cycle. And what's the update on Harold Perkins?
Harold Perkins is the best high school football player 2022 that I've seen play this season. He's unreal. He could play at running back, linebacker, defensive end, safety. Like, this is a guy that can play anywhere in college, and he's going to play immediately. Reminds me a ton of Malik Jefferson with more of an edge. Texas is in it. They have sold him on a hybrid position, basically a mixture of safety and linebacker that is really alluring to him. He has visited Texas a handful of times this season. He'll just pop up in Austin for a game, and that's always a good sign. The one guarantee I know with Harold is he wants to play in the SEC. That's going to happen. And so the fact that Texas is making that move really keeps them in the conversation. I think that Texas A&M and LSU are kind of the two schools jockeying for him at this point. But Texas is in this. They have. This is one of those all staff type of recruitments. You know, it's not just the defensive coordinator and linebacker coach that's recruiting him. It's Steve Sarkisian. It's Jeff Banks. It's the primary guys like that are bringing in the big guns. Harold Perkins is going to be a guy that you got to watch all the way up until signing day. And Texas has a really good shot. It's going to be interesting to see with all the coaching changes over the next week or so where we see guys end up after the aftermath of OU and LSU. That may have a little bearing on it as well. But the consistency is Texas and Texas A&M. And if I was guessing, it's going to be one of those two schools.
And not talking about recruits, but I know some of our current commits have guys turning up the heat on them. Any of the commits we currently have now that we're in danger of losing? For instance, I know schools are after Chris Ross really heavy.
If you asked me last week who I would worry about, I would have told you two names: Armani Winfield and Jamarian Miller. And those two, you know, they ducked out of the class recently. And so those weren't a very big surprise. Chris Ross would be more of a surprise. I know Ole Miss is coming at him hard, but this is a guy that I think is pretty solid to this Texas class. Right now, for my information, I don't see that changing. If there's anybody else in this class, I really don't know. You know, if you look up and down, I don't see a lot of attrition left from any potential decommitments. Now, it's recruiting. This thing can change on a dime. But like I said, once Armani Winfield and Jamarian Miller decommitted and left the cycle, I kind of thought those were going to be the two guys they lose. I thought if they lose somebody after a 5-7 season, after losing to Kansas at home, it was going to be those two guys. Chris Ross would be a big hit. Now they've got a ton of defensive linemen and a ton of defensive players in this group. And so if there's one guy you could possibly, lose, it may be him just because there's so many other guys, but he's a future interior guy. Those guys are hard to come by. He's a hoss at North Shore. I think Ross sticks with Texas.
And OU has current players hitting the portal left and right. And it's rare for people to jump sides of the Red River, but are there any guys Texas could pick off since they are originally from Texas? Names Hazelwood, Mims, Weiss, Stogner, Clayton Smith are all out there.
Well, right now, Theo Weiss is a guy. I think he's already, if he hasn't entered the portal, he's going to. Jaden Hasselwood's another. Those are two wide receivers that could play at Texas immediately. I think a Hasselwood would obviously be the better take. But there's going to be a handful of OU players that do hit the portal. There's going to be a few more that trickle out over the next few days. Clayton Smith was the guy that I'd mentioned just because Texas was so close with him in his recruitment. For the longest time, Texas was the leader in that pursuit. And only from the previous staff mishandling connections with him did it literally push him to Norman. And so Clayton Smith is a kid. And also, his best friend is Texas high edge and UT commit Derek Brown, who's become kind of the bell cow, the lead recruiter of this class. he's doing a good job, not just reaching out to other recruits, but keeping the ones that they have in the mix, keeping those guys together. That's Derek, Derek and Clayton are best friends. So it's only more speculation after that. But Clayton's a guy that if he popped up in the portal, that's something I think Texas would look at quickly, because he could come in and play immediately. And like I said, Hasselwood is a guy that I think is a take. Theo Weiss is a guy I would take a chance on. He was a real good productive receiver at Allen. And there's probably going to be some more. There's going to be a handful of other ones. Jacob Sexton, he's a commit. He's a kid that's looking at other options right now. He might change his mind. Xavier Bryce, an incredible athlete out of Arlington Seguin. He's the quarterback there, but he's going to play DB in college, and he has got tremendous upside. He's a guy that's having to reevaluate his options. And one more guy to watch is OU commit Kip Lewis, linebacker out of Carthage. He's a kid that Texas got in with him pretty close, but at the end of the day, he chose the Sooners. He's another one that he's basically turning his phone off because it has become too much for him. He's going to have to rethink his options and what happens. And so this coaching free fall really does affect a lot of players, not just on the team and in the portal, but also in the recruiting class with who they have. And so from some of the guys that Texas was involved in, that's a handful that I've heard Texas could look at again if they were to present themselves.
Clayton Smith would be a nice grab. And here's my final question. I got to ask you straight up. Do we land any of the major targets from earlier in the year before Texas starts rewriting history? Out of the top 7 guys, who do we land? Who's most likely? Devon Campbell?
I think Devon Campbell is the most likely. I think Texas is in the best spot with him. I can't wait to see him tonight and catch up with him. I love a 6'3", 315-pound offensive lineman that can play the post. I mean, if that skill doesn't translate at the next level, I don't know what does. I think Devon would be at the top of that list. I think Texas looks good there. If Kelvin Banks does decide to flip, I think it would be Texas. If he does decide, I don't want to live all the way to in the Pacific Northwest, I think Texas would be the spot there too. After that, it's a lot of conjecture and it's a lot of guessing. Harold Perkins, maybe. Denver Harris, possibly. But that's what the final 2 weeks is. So, leading up to early signing day, that's kind of the excitement. Where are these guys going to go? These in-home visits, like I said earlier, are going to tell us a little bit more about where the coaches feel like they stand with certain players. So say if they go see a certain 5-star guy and they don't come back feeling better, you might see an offer of a contingency, come out the next day or two. It's funny that Savion Red was offered and Evan Stewart announced his commitment, just an hour later, not even an hour later. And so it's fun. You'll kind of see the domino effect of how that happens. But right now, I think Texas is in a great spot with Devon Campbell. And I think if Kelvin Banks decides to flip, I think they're in a best spot with him too.
Man, thank you for coming on, Justin. I always learn a lot, and I know the fans appreciate the update as well. So please tell those who aren't familiar where to find you.
Man, I appreciate it. We love all the work you do. You're a tremendous asset for us. Find us at InsideTexas.com. That's where everything's at. We've moved on to On3 Network. It has been a really good transition. There was so much talent there. And with recruiting coming up and getting hot, this is actually the time to get involved. This is the time to sign up. You can find me at Justin Wells 2424 on Twitter, Justin Wells 24 on Instagram, and I'm always at InsideTexas.com. Please come by and say hi. We'd love to have you.
And that's a wrap for the wonderful Justin Wells. It's going to be an absolutely wild next few weeks, so stay tuned for more updates. Don't forget, you can always subscribe to InsideTexas.com for always up-to-date recruiting news from the guys actually on the ground. Thanks for hanging out. Watch more of my videos here, and like, subscribe, and share if you'd like to support quality Texas content. As always, book 'em.